Welcome everybody to this tiled seminar on preprints, a guide to accessible research for teachers, students, and academics. We have Dr. Emily Nordmann here today with us, who will be talking about this topic and sharing best practice and giving practical tips on this topic. And again, feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and we will address them, or Emily will address them at the end of the session. And without further ado, I will hand over to Emily.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me just do the requisite awkward screen sharing. Okay, is that okay? Yep. Cool. So I am going to have the chat up as I'm speaking. So if anyone does have any questions, I will attempt to answer them as I go along. But I'm also aware that we have some people here that don't know anything about preprints, who've never used them before. We have some people here who are probably, better experts than I am. I'm really glad to see that Valerie's here from the Glasgow's Research Info Management team. Valerie, if you have any expertise, from your work, please do feel free to add it in the chat. If anyone has any experiences and stuff, yeah, please, it would be great to have this as a kind of a collective experience. So yes, my name is Emily Nordmann. I'm a senior lecturer here in psychology at the University of Glasgow, but I am also, for the last 9 months or so, I am the communications and outreach chair for EdArXiv, which is the education preprint server. Part of the reason I'm doing this talk is just because I think preprints are a really, really good thing in general, and I think everyone should be able to read research, but also I think they're of great benefit to particularly early career academics. But also I'm specifically doing this talk to try and promote EdArXiv as well, so that if you do have education-focused research, that you choose EdArXiv to upload it. As I said, I know that there are some people here who might be, teachers, students who aren't aware of the way that the academic publishing world works. So I am also going to do a little bit of an explainer on that so that everybody is up to speed. So those of you who already know about academic publishing, you can just sit back and roll your eyes at the state of it. Okay, so for those of you who aren't aware, the process of getting a research paper published in the traditional model is that you would submit your paper once it's finished for peer review. So you put in your paper, and typically it's, maybe 3 of your peers, 3 experts in the field, will review the paper and, look at it for theoretical, methodological robustness. This process can be very, very lengthy. I think at best you're looking at about 3 months. At worst, you're looking at years. I'm aware that there are some people who get papers accepted, within a week. I've never had that happen, but yeah, it can be a very lengthy process with, revisions and the paper going back and forth before it's finally published. I'm not sure what the average length is, but certainly it can take years. And actually, if you look at published papers, you will see on them, they usually have when was the paper submitted, when was it accepted, when was it published. So you can see just actually how long this process takes. The bigger issue with the traditional academic publishing route, though, is that it is traditionally relied on paywalled access to papers. So what this means is that if you're an academic or a student at a university, then your university is very likely paying very large fees to academic journals to get access to the papers. If you're not a student or an academic at a university and you don't have the institutional logon, then if you try and access a paper that's behind a paywall, they'll try and charge you for it. And this can be anywhere between, $10 and $50, $100. I've seen various ridiculous fees for individual papers. Of course, one of the issues with this for institutions is that not all institutions can afford the same level of access. And that goes, within the UK, we have, some Russell Group universities have huge amounts of money, and there are other institutions that, have much less of a surplus. But then we also have the issue whereby academics who are, in, for example, Africa or in Southeast Asia and so on, developing countries don't have the same level of financial support, which means that their academics, their researchers, their students are also cut off from being able to access these papers. One option that is available to researchers when you try to publish a paper is to pay to make your article open access. And there's a couple of ways that this can happen. So universities themselves can strike up these kind of institution-wide open access agreements with the publisher. So any academic who publishes a paper at the University of Glasgow with, like, let's say, the Springer group of journals will be covered under the open access agreement, and that means it won't be behind a paywall. The other route is where the authors themselves will pay what's known as an article processing charge, an APC, to make their article open access so that anybody can read it. And these APCs range from somewhere below $1,000 to the Nature Group recently announced that their open access fee was going to be $11,000 to publish one paper open access, which is it's such a huge amount of money. It's funny. It's absolutely ridiculous. And if you're coming to us and you're a teacher or you're a student and you weren't aware of the academic publishing model, it really, when you have to explain it out loud, it is quite mad, because most people, when you say, oh, I had a paper published, they're like, oh, that's great. How much money did you get for it? And it's the other way around. We don't get paid to publish. We have to pay. So this is the traditional model, and has many, many issues with it. So preprints. What preprints are is it's a version of a scholarly or scientific paper that precedes the formal peer review and publication process. So preprints are typically made available through dedicated preprint servers, such as things like EdArXiv, but there are more, and I'll come back to that in a second. So the idea is that the reason that we're paying all this money to the journals is that there's a value added component to what they do. We get the peer review process, there's the editing process, which is occasionally even sometimes helpful, but normally just introduces typos. There's also the formatting, so the nicely formatted journal articles. Preprints are typically the kind of the Word document, the non-formatted version that hasn't been peer reviewed. People do also sometimes upload the version of their paper that has been peer reviewed. This is technically known as a postprint. Although the word preprint is kind of used to describe all stages of it, but technically you can distinguish between something that's made available as a preprint before peer review and something that's made available on these kind of servers after the peer review process as a postprint. So these dedicated preprint servers, there are a lot of them, and I've made a I'll just put it in the chat now. I've made a link tree with some useful resources on, and this links to a list of preprint servers. You get discipline specific servers. So the original archive is from physics and maths, bioarchive for biology, EdArXiv, education, SciArchive, and then SocArchive is social sciences, but there's a lot more than this. You also get preprint servers that are country specific, so Africa Archive, China, India, and Indonesia Archive as well. There's then preprint servers that are actually run by the publishers. So SSRN is run by Elsevier, preprints.org is linked to MDPI. And then there's also, things like Zenodo and institutional repositories The Welcome Open Research also has a preprint server as well. There's a lot of different places that you can put a preprint. And to be honest with you, a preprint, you could put it on your own website. A preprint is just a version of your paper that has been made openly available, that hasn't been through the peer review process. Lisa is also saying in the chat that you can upload a version that is the fancier formatting, as long as you've done that formatting yourself. It's what you can't do is upload the formatted version that the journal has done. The reason that you probably want to upload your preprint to a dedicated server rather than just, you know, putting them on your own website or you know, somewhere that's just, yeah, that's not linked to a wider database, is that these dedicated servers give your preprint a DOI, which means that it's stable, it can be cited. That DOI can then be linked to the DOI of the published paper. And importantly, these preprint servers tend to be indexed by Google Scholar. So your preprints will show up on your Google Scholar profile. And if anybody cites your preprint, then those citations can actually be combined with the citations of your of the published version as well. So hang on, let me just I'm just going to bring this up. Right, hang on. So if I go to my Google Scholar profile, some of these are listed as preprints. So for example, this one here, maximizing the educational and research value of the undergraduate dissertation psychology. We haven't got that published yet. We're still revising it, but it's available as a preprint. And you can see that it's already had 4 citations. Once that gets published, Google Scholar will actually combine the citations from the preprint version with the published version as well. Kai's asking in the chat, can journals prevent you from uploading a preprint? So I'm actually going to go into that in quite a lot more detail in a second. So I will just hold off on answering that, if that's okay. Right, sorry, I am down a screen. I don't recommend trying to do a talk with a single screen. It's yeah, okay, right, should be back now. But yeah, I'm going to go into the journal preprint policy thing in a second. So most of this talk is about preprints in general and can be applied to any preprint server, but I do just want to do a bit of a specific plug for EdArXiv, given my role. So EdArXiv is hosted by the Center for Open Science at COS, which is based in the United States, and COS is also linked to SIPS, so the Society for the Improvement of Psychological Science. They run PsyArXiv as well, and so on. And EdArXiv is fully integrated with things like the Open Science Framework. So you can, link your preprint really easily to any other components of your project, if there's your data, your code, and so on. And it is also fully indexed by Google Scholar, which means that you can make sure that you're really keeping track of the impact that it's having. Specifically, if you're doing education research, I want to try and encourage you to upload to EdArXiv because what we're trying to do at EdArXiv is to target the full community of the full education community. So researchers, teachers, practitioners, and students. This is my first year as communications and outreach chair. And what I've been doing this year is trying to focus on getting the word out to academics and researchers. But the second phase of my strategy is then to be getting in contact with schools, with teachers and stuff, and making sure that they're aware of this resource as well. So if you upload to EdArXiv, then you can know that you're uploading to somewhere where we're kind of actively trying to promote you to the full education community. And in terms of, browsing through EdArXiv, there are education specific categories as well. So, you can look at the different types, whereas I know that if you upload to PsyArXiv, then the educational psychology category tends to collapse as one, whereas you can be more specific with EdArXiv. Okay. Lydia's asking in the chat, what should the timeline look like? So again, I think that will be answered in the talk, so I'll just leave it for now, but I will come back to any questions I don't think I've covered. Okay, so I'm now just going to go through the benefits, and then we're going to, towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to go through frequently asked questions and concerns. So, benefits for academics. First of all, it's fully open access, and it is truly open access. There's no fees. It's it's free for the authors to upload. Particularly as a teaching focused person, I don't really have access to a huge amount of research funding. Things like open access fees and stuff are difficult for me to manage if I had to pay them to the journal, whereas preprints have allowed me to make my work completely open access. There's also evidence that if you upload your paper as a preprint, that it actually increases the citations and the attention that the full published paper gets. And that link tree that I just put in the chat there has a couple of links to published papers. So it does actually seem to boost the reach of your research. Uploading your work as a preprint can also allow you to get feedback before you submit it for peer review. Now, when you submit the preprint, as the question was in the chat, is up to you. Some people will submit their a preprint, gain feedback from the community, revise their manuscript, and then submit it for peer review. Some people will post the preprint at the same time as it's been submitted for peer review. Some people might actually wait until it's been accepted before they post the preprint. There's a lot of variability in how people choose to approach this, but if you do post your preprint before peer review, it does actually give you the opportunity to get feedback and to maybe try and improve your chances of getting it accepted in the peer review process. Another benefit is that it increases speed of dissemination. That process, 3 months to a couple of years, really does slow things down. And in some cases, you really do want to be able to get your work out there quickly. And I've got a couple of case studies from my own work that I'm going to show you to try and explain the benefits. And it's also, and this is all kind of linked, which is that I think preprints allow you to evidence impact for job applications, promotion applications, tenure applications. I'm not saying that having a preprint is, that you don't need to then try and push to get the paper accepted. In all cases, when I've submitted preprints, I have also really tried to put them through the peer review process and get them accepted. But what it means is that you don't have all this work that you've done that isn't recognized. Particularly if you're early career, if you don't have any formal publications yet, but you do have the work written up, it's so much better to have that, a preprint on your CV, than it is to have, submitted or in prep, because what it demonstrates is that you can actually write things up. You have actually, completed that research product. The reason that I think that preprints are even more useful if you're a teaching focused academic is that, for me, citations are not really the thing that I think is important for me demonstrating impact. For me, I want people to be reading and using my work. It tends not to get cited a huge amount. And so having the preprint there, being able to get my work out to share it, and have the preprint download numbers and so on, I have found just so incomparably useful. Let's see if I can get up my CV. Okay. So this is my CV now. So rather than just having my list of publications, I also have the numbers of preprint downloads, for each one, and then the citations according to Google and altmetric and so on. And then I also have a specific preprint section as well for papers that haven't yet been accepted, to show that this is the work that I am doing. And in terms of teaching focused academics, it's not just being able to evidence impact, but one of the things I found at the beginning of my career when I was switching to from psycholinguistic research, which is my specific research, to pedagogical research, was that it took me a little bit of time to kind of find my feet in that area and kind of figure out what the education journals were looking for. But by being able to upload my work as a preprint, I could A, get feedback, but B, I could demonstrate that I was actually doing work in this area. If I had waited to share things until that they were published, I would not be at the University of Glasgow. That 100% categorically, I have the job I have now because I was able to share my work early. Helene is asking, do you recommend uploading to just one archive, or is it a good idea to upload to more than one place? So I would say only upload to one, because it's being given a consistent DOI. You would then have two DOIs. I think it would be, and please, Lisa or if Valerie, if anyone can jump in with more knowledge of what chaos that might create in the background, please do. But I suspect that you probably only want it in one place if it's on a dedicated server. So just to give you two examples, and I'm going to use my own work because I know it better and I know the impact it had, but apologies if it seems like narcissistic bragging. So this was a paper that was formally published in 2019. I think it was online at the end of 2018, but formally in 2019. So this paper was, it was first submitted in March 2017. By October 2017, it had been rejected twice. At that point, I then got slightly disillusioned and I decided to upload it as a preprint in the October, and then I submitted it to a third journal. I then actually ended up withdrawing it from that third journal because after 3 months, they hadn't actually assigned it an editor, never mind sent it out for peer review, and they said it was going to be another 6 months or something even to get an editor. So I withdrew it from that journal and then submitted it to a fourth journal. And it was finally accepted at that fourth journal at Higher Education in October 2018. The day it was accepted, the preprint had 770 downloads. But what was so important for me was that on the basis of sharing that work as a preprint, I had several talk invitations. I had several new collaborations that I was able to show that this was something that I was working on. It was lecture capture. And now on altmetric, that paper is #1 on altmetric compared to outputs from the same journal of a similar age, and it's in the 97th percentile of all outputs. So it really, really helped me at a very early stage of my career, let people know this is what I've been working on. If I had waited, so I think what's interesting about, to put this into context, is that I started my job at the University of Glasgow in November 2018. When I applied, because I had my preprint, I could show evidence that I was working on pedagogical stuff. If I had waited until it was accepted, I wouldn't have had any of that stuff. A slightly different example from later in my career was this 10 simple rules for supporting a temporary online pivot in higher education. And this was when we went into lockdown in March 2020, my reaction to stress is I work my way through it, which is useful for my career, but might end up killing me quite early. So when lockdown happened, I wrote this paper And it was extremely time sensitive. You know, people were trying to plan how to, you know, pivot their courses online. And we needed to get it out there, but we also wanted to get feedback from the community. The idea of this paper was to try and help people with the impending, you know, massive change that we were going to have to make. So we put it out for feedback for a couple of weeks. We then got the feedback from the community. It did really help improve the paper. And then we submitted it for publication. That preprint actually got 1,000 downloads in the first week. It's now at 4,500 downloads, and it's in the 98th percentile on Altmetric. But the preprint allowed us to react quickly. And of course, we've seen this throughout the pandemic with, you know, COVID research and vaccine research, that preprints have allowed people to disseminate and share their research faster. But that was also another real big win for preprints. In terms of the benefits for teachers, first of all, again, it's fully open access, which means there isn't that paywalled barrier. It's arguable whether or not teachers have the time to engage with primary research, but you know, if they want to, they should be able to do that. So preprints allow teachers access to primary research if they're not associated with an institution that is paying all those expensive subscription fees. But I think preprints are also really useful in teaching students about the process of science, because you can't understand what a preprint is without explaining things like the peer review system or academic publishing. And one of the other benefits that I think Lisa has mentioned in the chat as well is that when you upload a preprint, if you update it, the preprint server are certainly the ones that are run by the Center for Open Science. They show you all drafts. So if you've uploaded 3 different versions, publicly available will be the 3 different versions. And I think that's a really useful thing to teach people about the fact that, you know, we do edit, we redraft, that things get revised and so on. It's a nice concrete example of how revising a manuscript can change it, and sometimes the extent of those changes. In terms of benefits for students, again, access to primary research after graduation. Once you graduate, it means that if you want to keep up with the research that you can. But preprint servers also, they're not just for, you know, established academics. If you want to publish your dissertation or your thesis as a preprint, you can absolutely do that. So EdArXiv accepts any complete research product, and that's a fairly broad definition. But if you do want to put out your dissertation or your thesis, you can as a preprint. And again, it helps you evidence that, you know, you can show your work off. It's not just like, oh, I wrote my dissertation on this. It's go and read my dissertation. And again, I think it's helpful to see how the process of peer review changes can affect manuscripts as well. Certainly, I think the more honesty and the more transparency we can have about the peer review process and about the process of science and how things get written, the better. So actually having really clear examples of papers that have like undergone these changes, I think can be a really helpful thing for students. David's just asked in the chat, what are the mechanisms for merging a preprint and journal DOI? So what you do, sorry, honestly, remind me never to give a talk with one screen again. It's just really hard. This is EdArXiv. This is one of my papers. And what you can see here is that there's the preprint DOI, and then you can also add in the peer-reviewed publication DOI. So both are listed there. So you can go in as the author and just list these. There's also, you can see the download of the previous versions. And we did actually, to the front page of this, just add a note about what changed between version 1 and 2, I think it was, and so on. So you can, the DOI stuff is built into the preprint servers, but you can also add a note onto the front page telling people, what you've done there, right? Okay, let me see if I can go back to this. Okay. Right, so frequently asked questions, and we've had a couple of these in the chat already, so I'll try and speed through the ones that I've already covered. When to post a preprint, it depends on what your purpose is of posting. If you want to get feedback, then post it early. If you're wanting to speed dissemination, you can post it early. If you're just posting it to make sure that it's open access, then you might just want to post it towards the end of the process. So it depends on really what you're looking for. In terms of who owns the copyright, so you own the copyright as the author of a paper until the rights are transferred. But what's important is that typically the journal that it's published with, what they own is the version of record. And the version of record is the post peer review version. What you should try and do, and I'm going to go into this a bit more in a second, is look up the preprint policy of the journal. An increasing number of journals now have a very clear and explicit preprint policy. Some of them might put an embargo period on, posting a postprint or something like that. So do check with them. Lisa's saying in the chat, some servers have strict review to make sure papers are on topic. Does EdArXiv do any checking? So there typically there's two ways that the preprint servers check what's being uploaded. It's either pre or post moderation. So with pre-moderation, you submit your preprint and then it doesn't get it's not public until somebody approves it. Post-moderation is where it's public immediately, but then someone will go in and check it. EdArXiv does pre-moderation. So somebody checks before it goes public that it is suitable. One of the issues we have with EdArXiv is people uploading like homework assignments or teaching materials. And that's not the purpose of EdArXiv. It is for research products. There are other databases available for that, but we do check that it is actually research that's being uploaded. Yeah. What happens if the manuscript is updated? I've already kind of mentioned this. All versions are already available. I would encourage you, if you're going to do this, to actually make a note on the front page of what has changed. I think it's quite good practice anyway, is just to keep, a change log of that. And it just promotes transparency about the process of science, which is never a bad thing. But the DOI remains stable. So the DOI is always the same. In terms of preprint policies, so this table is probably too small to be of any use on the screen just now, but this table that I've got up here comes from Monchons et al. 2020, and there is a link to that paper in the link tree that I've just put in the chat, and that gives an overview of the preprint policies for most major psychology publishers. Obviously, we have a psychology bias, but there is, and it's nice to see James putting it in the chat preemptively. There's the Sherpa Romeo database, and that gives, I think that has a list of all preprint policies for all journals, although Valerie is saying it can be out of date. So either check the publisher papers directly, or if you're at Glasgow, then email the research open access team. But you should find that the journals should have a clear preprint policy available. some don't. It's not complete coverage, but I think in it, the big publishers now do. Okay, so common concerns. Probably I think the biggest one, and it's already come up in the chat, is the idea that manuscripts will be rejected due to being posted as a preprint. And I think that the key thing here is that it is important to check the preprint policy of the journal. Most journals do now accept preprints, but you do want to make sure. I also, in my cover letter, whenever I'm submitting, I tend to include a line that says something like, please note that this manuscript has been made available as a preprint in line with your journal's preprint policy. So I'm just flagging that it is a preprint, but I'm also flagging that, that they do have a policy. I have had one issue. I did have one rejection that was essentially because of a preprint, and that journal did have a preprint policy. It was Education and Information Technologies. So I want to be submitting there again. It was quite a few years ago now, so hopefully things have gotten a bit better. But generally speaking, particularly with the major publishers, preprints are now, you know, kind of an accepted method of dissemination. There is also a concern that the papers or ideas will be scooped by other researchers, and I've never completely understood the concern about this one. I think the idea is that the concern is that if you publish your work and it's still in a kind of, let's say, a draft stage, that people might take your idea and then run with it. Our argument from the preprint side would be that actually, if you have a preprint and it is, yes, as Geeta's saying in the chat, you've got the copyright, you've got a date stamped time of, you know, this was my work, these are my ideas. So I actually think it prevents scooping, but this is apparently something that comes up as a concern. Nana is asking in the chat, how do you cite the preprint? You just cite it as you normally would. It depends on obviously which citation format you're using, but you can, yeah, Lisa's putting it in the chat there. So you can just cite it with, you know, the fact that it's a preprint in the citation. Another concern is that the anonymization of peer review will be damaged. That obviously, if your preprint goes viral, then that might affect, you know, the people who are going to peer review it may then know who you are and be able to connect you up. This one, I think, doesn't have a good answer, and I'm happy to hear from anybody. And when I say anybody, I mean Lisa's got a camera on and I can see her and she's typing. Yeah, but for anyone who has maybe a more satisfactory answer to this, there is that risk, and I don't think it's a risk you can take away. My take on it is that I think it's worth the risk. That's, yeah, but I don't think I can really say that that isn't a concern, or it's not something that could happen. That's a very good point. That's a much better way of putting that. Yeah. So if you give a talk at a conference and people see it, and you're, you know, the audience is people who are likely to review it, then there's a very good chance it would be the same kind of thing. Another concern, the multiple versions can cause confusion. So I think one way to address this is by, you know, having that cover sheet, having a change log. I have had issues with this before, whereby, especially if you're using your own preprints, I kind of like messed up the space-time continuum, whereby the preprint had changed, but I kind of used it as the basis for another bit of work, and then it became this like chicken and egg, and it all got quite messy. So yeah, there is, I think there is potentially that concern, but to be honest, I think it's about clarity. I think it's about, you know, if you're going to have a preprint, have that front page, be very clear about what stage of review it's in, and then if it changes, say how it's changed. I think that's the way to deal with that. Another concern is that citations to the preprint will reduce citations to the published paper. So the evidence is that actually preprinting stuff increases citations. For Google Scholar, it combines them. Obviously, things like Scopus and stuff at the moment, as far as I'm aware, don't combine citations from the preprint and the published paper, but Google Scholar does. And I don't know if you saw my CV earlier, but I now just put in the Google Scholar and the Scopus citations to reflect both. And then the final concern is that the lack of peer review means unverified research will be in the public domain. And I suppose my responses to this would be, we've all read terrible papers that have been past peer review. Peer review isn't always, you know, a marker of quality, although it is a really important part of the process. We've seen this in COVID, and in terms of vaccine stuff, we've seen, you know, papers that were released as preprints and then used by the press, but actually they turned out to be, you know, not very good science. And again, I think in terms of balancing the risk and the reward, I think that the benefits outweigh the risks. I think it's important that we are clear about, again, what stage of the process the work is at. And again, I think it helps a conversation about the process of science. I think the more people who understand how papers come about, the better. Yeah, but also, you know, yeah, well, preprints are now in Scopus. Oh, there you go. Okay, I'm good. That's too much for me to read whilst also trying to keep the talk going. So I'll come back to that.
They don't link them now, but they might link them in the future, but they do list them in Scopus.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. Yeah, I think the worries about, you know, the work not being as high quality is, I don't think that that's a strong enough argument to take away all the benefits that preprints have. I think I did actually see, and I've lost it because it was on Twitter, but I saw a paper that had found that articles that were preprinted actually they didn't change that much to the accepted version. And one theory I saw on Twitter was that if you're preprinting your work, you're actually maybe going to be a little bit more careful about what you're putting out there. So before you submit it to the journal, because you're preprinting it, it kind of makes you really, you know, check that everything is okay. So, you know, it's possible that the process of preprinting can actually help improve the papers that are submitted, because there is just that extra level of scrutiny you put in it when you know that it's going to be publicly available. Okay, and then just finally, and then happy to have a general discussion and answer any questions. I've put some resources into that link tree. So there's the links to follow EdArXiv and the EdArXiv bot. Obviously, please do. Communications and Outreach Chair would love you to do that. The Sherpa Romeo database, it has all the policies. There's a really, really useful paper, which is a guide to managing and posting preprints that has a lot of detail in it. Carolina wrote an excellent blog about understanding research for teachers. And then there's also a link to a paper about the fact that they get more attention and citations if they've been pre-printed. So I hope that was useful. I'm going to stop screen sharing now because the one screen thing is really quite difficult. But yeah, happy to take any questions.
First of all, thank you so much, Emily. Yes, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, but you can also just raise your hand and ask your question on camera if you want to.
I've just seen this, there's a question from Liam in the chat. So what kind of checks does EdArXiv do before publishing something that gets submitted or not? Do you aim for a certain turnaround time? So really the check is, it's not a form of peer review. Is this a complete research product? And if it is, it will be published as a preprint. And if it's not, it will be rejected. We have a moderation committee of 2 or 3 people, and they tend to turn them around pretty quickly. So you're maybe looking at a couple of days at the most, but it can be quicker. Yeah.
I think I have a question in regards to preprints and all those databases. So what do you think, how could teachers use this kind of resource most effectively or for their benefit, and how could students use that, for example?
So I think I mean the big thing is about getting open access to research in terms of removing the paywalls. The different preprint servers tend to all have kind of different specialized searches, so if you want to look at the different categories, it can maybe help you get a better understanding of the different kind of work that is being done in that field. I think also for teachers as well, it would be possible to use them as an exercise. I think when I first started at Glasgow, Helena had a great exercise in the ODL where they did a peer review of a preprint. And then was it also that you compared the preprint with the published paper?
No, we didn't do that. It was literally just it was when preprints were fairly new in psychology, and we found 3 prints that had variable quality, and the exercise was basically for students to practice being a reviewer. And it was in an MSc class. It was a face-to-face class actually, and it was a great exercise because it showed students just what's out there and how to, and it brought up their confidence in terms of reviewing, because they didn't review the people themselves. It was an exercise, but they were really, really good. So we just made some guidance, and it was really good. I've actually got a poster that I can send Carolina afterwards if she wanted to share it, but it was I still really think it's a really good exercise, but that is one of the real benefits that preprints do. It can offer learning opportunities and other kinds of things that you're not used to. But as Emily said, the best thing about them is just that you can get access to research that is current much more quickly.
I think that the biggest benefit for teachers is using them as a vehicle to teach about the process of science. That would be just because you can't understand what a preprint is without talking about the process of science, and it maybe makes it a little bit more concrete when we talk about peer review and things like that.
Yeah. And I think we have a question in the chat from I think Kasia.
Is it expected that you disclose to the journal that your submitted paper has been posted as a preprint? So in terms of whether or not you have to do this, I think can be stated in the journal policy. So some policies will say that you should make the editor aware. I just do it as a kind of standard. I want them to know, because if there's going to be an issue, I want to know immediately. I don't want to have to wait 3 months for them to figure it out. So I just now do it up front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, is there another question in the chat that I'm missing? I don't think so.
Sorry. So I actually put a question. I don't know whether it's a useless question. If so, tell me. My question is whether we can have let's say a working paper series which can be linked to EdArXiv. So for example, in economics, we usually do have working paper series, and we submit our preprints to that, and someone has a look to see whether it's sort of okay. And then we'll link it up with SSRN or something like that. And then it becomes a sort of a preprint. We call it a working paper series. So I'm wondering whether that is allowed in EdArXiv, whether...
I'm not entirely sure I know what you mean. I think I might need to go and we can maybe talk. I can maybe send you a message if you want. We can maybe discuss.
Yes, Emily.
I think maybe saying like an example of it would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, David, yes.
Hello, Emily. I haven't met Emily, but actually I learned about preprints from Emily because I actually commented on one of her preprints.
Oh, was that? Oh, lecture rapture. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I remember.
No, not the lecture rapture.
Oh, no, it was the 10 simple rules one.
The 10 simple rules. I don't know if it had any effect on your revision, but
no, yeah, we did take on board all the feedback.
Anyway, then I was taken by the idea. Then I did actually put 2 preprints up, one with Geeta, who just spoke, on the archive. But one thing I noticed about this that you haven't talked about really is that merely putting it up on the archive doesn't really mean that people see it. And to be honest, when I went on a couple of times, I went back to look at your preprint on the archive because I wanted to see how you formatted the front page, which I used as a model for mine. And when I did a search, I found it quite difficult to find your paper. If I keyed in 10 simple rules, even your name, it didn't actually come up. But the main thing I was going to say was that was to ask about was I think that your paper's got lots of reads because you were on Twitter and you were talking about them. I think if you I didn't actually want the preprint to have massive output. What I wanted to do was to create the DOI so that the idea was out there and I could at least send some people to it. But it didn't really get massive reads, whereas the actual paper got massive reads. One of the papers I put up got 10,000 reads, whereas on the archive, maybe, got a few hundred or something. So there was the issue about publicizing it.
Oh yeah, I mean, so if you get something published in our journal, then you get all the journal alerts that people are subscribing to. You get, the publication. You get all of that stuff. Like it's the value added thing that you're paying all that stuff for to the publisher. So yeah, preprints. If you want people to if you want to try and get a lot of attention, then it does require some self-publication. I spend far too much time on Twitter, so that's been quite a good venue for me to do that.
So it's useful for people to know that you need to market it a little bit yourself.
I think, I wouldn't expect, don't just like upload it and then do nothing.
Yeah.
You might get a few reads, and there are things like the bots. I should have actually explained that. So EdArXiv bot, SciArchive bot, they automatically tweet when there's a new preprint uploaded. So people can get access to them like that. But yeah, if you want the preprint to get much attention, then it does require a little bit of self-promotion.
Yeah. I mean, the other question I had really, which wasn't quite answered by the earlier point, was, I mean, the DOI of the preprint always remains separate from the DOI of the actual published article.
Yeah.
And in a way, I mean, I want people to read the article in the journal and cite that rather than be citing the preprint. So there is a kind of tension there that isn't really easily resolvable.
Yes. So, I mean, what I do when I remember is if a paper gets accepted, I then upload.
Put the final one,
I change. So I put the DOI on, but I also then change the front cover to say, this has now been accepted. Please cite this version.
Yeah, so but you say cite this DOI though.
I specifically say, please cite the published version.
Yeah, okay.
Of course, if people have already downloaded the preprint and don't go back and download it, then sure, they might do the preprint. All of the evidence that we have suggests that uploading your work as a preprint increases citations. Yeah. So whilst there is I would say that there's a theoretical tension, I don't think there's a practical tension.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, once again, listening today, I feel very convinced by this preprint idea. I mean, mainly because of the time lag in the publications thing. If you've produced something that is, I mean, I'm working on things that I want to get out right away, and having to write them up and wait is a problem. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question by Nana. I know if you want to just read it yourself, Emily, it's a bit longer. I think it is a question.
Oh yeah. Are you saying that by letting the editor know about the preprint up front, it may make the process faster? i.e. they will reject it quickly if any issues rather than wait 3 or 4 months. Yeah, I think so. If you are submitting to a journal that has a preprint policy, which is what you should check, the chances of there being an issue are very, very small. I just think that it's easier to then put it in the cover letter. The one time when I had that issue, I hadn't explicitly flagged it in the cover letter. So I think it's just, it's like a courtesy. It's just, you know, it's just letting them know, and also letting them know that you have actually read their policy, and they may not themselves have read their policy. So you can at least, you know, flag that it does exist.
Thank you. Then we have a question by Kai. How does ResearchGate differ from preprint archives?
So Valerie has helpfully said in the chat to check the publisher policy. As far as I'm aware, I mean, you can upload preprints to ResearchGate. ResearchGate is, I find it's constant notifications. I find it quite aggressive and annoying, to be honest with you. And do they have like a paid version, or is that academia.edu? Basically, as far as I'm aware, I think you can use ResearchGate for preprints, although I don't know if they assign a DOI, and I don't think it would be indexed by Google Scholar. So I would go with the dedicated preprint servers, EdArXiv.
Okay, thank you so much. If there aren't any other questions, I would like to thank Emily for this fantastic talk and sharing all the resources. As always, we will have everything together in a summary post on the Tile Network website. And thank you again, Emily.
No worries. Thank you very much for the invitation.